And welcome to Thrift Shop Biography. This is the one about Christian Dior. Thank you for listening. Hello, I'm Richard.
And I'm Cleo.
And welcome to our podcast, Thrift Shop Biography, where we go into thrift shops.
Or op shops, or charity shops.
And we head straight for the bookshelves, and we look for memoirs and autobiographies of people of note, and then we read them.
And have a chat.
But we're not allowed to start talking until we press record, which we are going to do right now.
Now.
Hello, Cleo.
Hello, Richard. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks.
I'm all right. You all right?
I'm all right, thanks. How are
Good.
you?
I'm all right, as it happens. How are you?
I'm all right, thanks. How are you? So, the book you found for us this week is the autobiography of Christian Dior. Is that how you say it?
Christian Dior. I'm not sure. I can't do a French accent.
He's not Chinese, is he?
Because we had trouble with Celine Dion. So it might be...
Yeah.
It might be Christian Dior.
Christian Dior. Do you know what? Let's just say Christian Dior.
Chris. Let's just call him Chris.
Chris
No,
Dior.
he would not like that.
No, he's a real snob, isn't he?
Yeah. He's quite posh, it turns out.
Very posh, I would say.
It's funny because he only writes about his origins at the very end of the book.
Yeah.
And at the start, he comes in at the beginning of his couture career, really. But he's 41 when he starts the House of Dior. And he seems really humble.
I know.
He just seems like a really humble fellow. And then you get right to the end. And he says, I'm a really posh, heavily funded by my parents man who's been so frivolous and just kind of landed on his feet.
I was really torn by him, actually, because I do like him. And the voice in the book, I love the way it's written. It's quite camp and glorious, if you know what I mean. It's what you would expect from one of the world's leading fashion designers. But at the same time, I kind of almost, the more I read, didn't like his personality. He's just like a spoilt little bastard.
I know, but is that only when you read the end, or did you already pick that up?
No, because I was the way he reacted sometimes to his family when they were in need. And then he wouldn't go. He eventually came good with them. Anyway,
Yes.
we do this, but we should just get on with the story.
But to feel like you know the man behind the name Dior, which is so huge in our world.
Yeah, we know Dior. Well, we ask each other every week, don't we? What did we know about Christian Dior? Well, do you know what? I know nothing about the man.
I've never known as much nothing. Well, I have, actually. There's a few I didn't know. But this is one of those nothing ones.
But we know the brand, right?
Yeah, you know the brand. That's it.
Yeah. It's interesting with brands because like the Vivienne Westwood one, which still remains one of the favourite books we've read.
Yes.
She has this exciting life story, but actually the brand Vivienne Westwood only happens when the business world and major investors come on board. And that kind of is so incongruous to the ethos of being a creative. And I feel that same thing kind of happens with Dior. You know, in order to become a worldwide conglomerate, you don't do that by being a couture designer in Paris. You do that when the money men get involved. Anyway, is that boring?
I don't know.
Yes. Anyway, should we just get into it?
Yeah, let's get into it.
Christian Ernest Dior.
Yes, born in 1905 in Granville, Normandy.
Which he doesn't say in the book.
No, I don't think he does, actually.
Did you have to look that up?
I did look up a few things.
Yeah.
Yeah, he really does avoid telling us too much personal detail. And you'll be happy because, you know, I'm always going to go back to Agatha Christie, who was still at 5 years old at page 232. You were very upset.
Oh, my God. I was mad about that.
So you should be quite pleased by this.
Oh, yeah. He does it very, very quickly.
Yeah.
The amazing thing about his childhood, it comes at the end of the book, and you're kind of like, okay, he's talked about his success and being a fashion designer. When we get to the part of the book where we're going to find out about the man and how the man was made, when he talks about his childhood, he basically just describes the houses that he lived in great detail. And the architecture.
Yes,
and
he loves architecture.
Yeah, and the soft furnishings. And it's like, okay, tell us a bit about yourself. But then I think, well, this is just the destiny of the man, was to become a fashion designer and a couturist.
Yes, exactly.
This is like what he noticed. This is who he was.
Yes, he's obsessed with art, architecture. Yeah, wallpapers. But then you sort of, between the lines, you go, he was quite well off because he was obsessed with the big round moulding on his ceiling from which hung a giant glistening chandelier. And you're like, okay, you had quite a big bedroom in essentially what sounds like a palace.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And used to hang around in the linen room, and the housemaids told you fairy tales. Like, oh, okay.
And they got a driver and a handyman.
Oh my God, they got loads of staff.
So they are that fortunate and rich because Dad was a fertilizer manufacturer.
Yes.
And that was in his family for like 2 generations.
Yeah, his great-great-grandpa was one of the first men to import guano from Chile to Europe. I looked up guano. It's seabirds and bats shit.
Yeah, guano is another name for shit.
Did you know that?
Yeah, because when I actually even read that he was a fertilizer manufacturer, I thought, gosh, he built his empire on shit.
On shit.
That's what fertilizer is, essentially, isn't it? I mean, now it's more chemical-based, but 100 years ago and beyond that, it was just shit.
So the foundation, Dior, is shit.
Probably also built on slavery as well in that era.
Well, coming over from Chile, or just poverty, probably.
Oh, yeah, exploited labour.
Yeah.
So let's say the House of Dior was built on exploitation and shit.
That's exactly right. So that's a huge lesson to learn straight off, isn't it? Very interesting.
Yeah. Well, it afforded this young lad a very nice upbringing, didn't it?
Yeah, really did.
I mean, I've got no proof to know that Dior actually isn't run on exploitation these days. These major fashion brands are generally outsourced to sweatshops in developing countries, aren't they?
Well, of course, fabrics, everything. Yeah, of course.
There you go. Right, I don't like him anymore.
But that's that's the world over. I mean, that's where fabric tends to get made in poorer countries. Absolutely amazing, incredible fabrics.
So you and I are very virtuous in that we don't partake with high-end fashion. We go to thrift shop and we buy recycled goods.
Actually, we do, but I can't say I exclusively do. I mean, like if you shop in cheap shops, it's probably worse what you're doing.
Oh, sure.
At least his stuff ended up being made by actual craftspeople in Paris, in the building. Mm-hmm. That's how it started out anyway. The rest of it is not his fault. How it might have evolved.
Yeah, I guess.
And that's just hypothetical because we don't know about the clothing industry, do we? Only what we've read in this book.
We know enough about fashion these days.
Do we?
About how... Anyway, let's get back to Dior in 1905 in Granville. He lives in a big house, sorry.
And he doesn't tell us much, but he really got into the book Round the World in 8 Days, which I thought was cool because later on he sort of travels America in the very same style as Phileas Fogg.
What, in a hot air balloon?
No, because in that book he does America by train.
Oh, yeah.
He also uses some other modes of travel, but mostly train. And so he lived his dream. But anyway, they moved to Paris in 1910.
Yeah, so when he was a little boy.
He was only 5, but he said it was the end of the Belle Epoque, which went right up to when the First World War happened. So it was at basically the good times. People were rich and there were massive parties and balls and dressing up and just excess and frivolity.
Yeah.
And he loved it. It was before austerity, basically.
Yeah. I mean, of course, sometimes we read about eras in the book, like we always say, 1970s London would have been really cool to be in 1980s New York. Well, actually, Paris in 1910.
Yes.
The Belle Epoque would have been stupendous.
Yes, it would. Yeah, so it sort of got stopped a bit in the war, 1914 to 19, First World War. But it clearly picked up again. It was the Second World War that really annihilated Europe, wasn't it, I guess? I mean, there's devastating loss of lives in the First World War, but in the Second World War it was lives, buildings, everything. It was infrastructure, everything. So there was another good time between the wars, wasn't there?
Yeah, this book made me realise, and we've read books by people who were born at the beginning of the 20th century before, but this book actually did make me realise that some people actually lived through 2 world wars.
Yes.
And the most striking thing about the First World War is when people were talking about it, nobody took it seriously because they thought it was impossible.
Yeah. That's true.
And I thought, well, that's kind of like the world we live in now. There's the constant threat of war. Sorry, I know there are wars going on in Ukraine and Syria and Israel, etc.
Everywhere.
Yeah. But I don't know, we still feel relatively safe in America and England. We're threatened with it every day on the news, and you kind of think, oh, it's not going to happen. And I think that's what people felt in like 1914. Oh, it's just talk.
Yeah.
And then when it happened, it was an actual shock.
Yes.
Like he said, his Fraulein at home, she was a German girl and they were a French family. And when the war broke out, it wasn't even taken seriously that the German girl stayed in the French family because they just thought, oh, this is all going to be over soon. And then one day the Fraulein said to them, I'm going home to shoot the French soldiers. And they were like, oh, wow. So the war is actually real now.
Oh, my
People
God.
we know are getting involved. So it was something that nobody thought, well, the average citizen, I guess. Mind you, as well, because they were posh and had money, they probably felt a bit removed from it anyway.
Yeah, they would have been, yeah. Because it does seem like they carried on through it.
Yeah.
He was 15 by 1919 at the end of the war.
Yeah, and you're right. They did seem to recover. What he says they seem to recover quite quickly. Again, that could have been because they were moneyed, maybe.
Yeah.
So it was easier for them to get going.
Yeah, it probably is. Yeah, it's very likely. So there was art, music, literature. He says it was the age of folly.
Yeah.
And there's drinking and clubs. And he obviously hit it all around the age of 15 after the war. Mm-hmm. The only thing that was really gone was colour. He said colours were banished, which, of course, him being a sensitive lad who absolutely loved art, he was gutted about.
Yeah.
Blackouts and mourning and Cubist severity. And because all that lovely Art Nouveau era... And all those twirls, and decorative arts, that all goes because you have to have practical functioning things, which of course really went after the Second World War. That's when it really, really went.
Yeah.
But then you've got Art Deco in the 30s, which is beautiful, but it's so much more streamlined, isn't it?
Yeah.
So at least there were colours coming back. And he was all about it. He was like, bring it back, because he was all into Matisse and Picasso, Braque. All those artists were coming around at that time, after that First World War, and they were bringing the colour back.
I love how observant he is as a young man, a teenager. He's really noticing architecture and style and colour. Like he was born an artist, wasn't he? That little boy, 5 years old,
absolutely.
is somebody who totally appreciated the visual aesthetic of things.
Yes, sponging it all up.
Surprising that it took him so long. To be
take off.
Independent, yeah. But it was always there.
Yeah, it was always there. And everyone he seems to be mingling with was someone. Because he's rich, so he's mingling with the elite.
And also, I suppose, like being born in 1905, his trajectory, as it were, was curtailed by 2 world wars.
Yeah, it really was, wasn't it? Oh, yeah, that makes sense.
So were it not for those, he might have got where he wanted to be earlier.
A lot sooner. That makes a lot of sense, actually, yeah.
There's nothing like a world war to stop you.
Yeah, that's right.
In your tracks.
Yeah, or a massive plague, for example.
Yes, I know. Do you know
really
what?
sets things back, doesn't it?
I thought about this when Christian Dior is 15 and the World War I ends, and all of a sudden he's in Paris, and Paris is coming back to life.
Yeah.
There's 2 things happening. The world is coming back to life for everyone, but also he's 15, so that's the time that he's being awakened and getting his independence and going out into the world of a young man. So it's like a double experience for him. And then when I was reading that, I was thinking, oh, this might be like what it was like to be at that age when lockdown was lifted, coming out of COVID.
Yeah, it probably would.
Probably wasn't as exciting as 1920s in Paris.
Yes.
But it depends on where you are, I suppose. So he does rattle through his early years quite a bit, doesn't he?
Yeah. And then he says to his parents he wants to study fine arts and architecture, and there's an outcry. He said, I'm not allowed to join the Bohemians.
Yes.
So he had to do political science, which he took on purpose because there's no commitment involved. So he could just tick the boxes and then continue his hectic life partying. I mean, he was bang in the middle of everything. It would be exactly like being bang in the middle of London when it's all kicking off. There's German Expressionism, films, and there was the Ballet Russe was happening at that time, and Jean Cocteau was designing all the sets, and Chekhov's plays were out for the first time.
He was going to clubs and seeing Josephine Baker. I mean, come on.
Josephine Baker! I know! And circuses, and art from China and Peru. It was like an absolute wealth of experience for him.
Yeah.
Thank God they moved to Paris.
Yeah.
Yeah, you do. Sometimes you do have to be in the city. It's a fact.
You know what? Just Paris, we've read quite a few books, even if it's Jane Fonda, Janice Dickinson, even Madonna, they all had a period in Paris. Grace Jones did.
Yeah.
Which kind of transformed them in one way or another.
Significant period. Yes, they really did.
I love Paris. I really do.
Yes.
I love the croissants.
Yeah. I love the camembert and baguettes.
And the string of onions around my neck as I ride my bicycle.
We are so cultured. All right, now that is a caricature. Whereas I genuinely love baguettes and camembert, and I'm not taking the piss. They're my favourite things in the world.
Do you wear a beret when you eat them? Do you twirl your moustache?
Maybe. Anyway, we've managed to upset every French person.
Oh dear.
Right, so anyway, in the middle of all this, he's making friends, and he really talks a lot about friendship. He's obviously got a really amazing circle of friends, and they're painters and writers and musicians and designers, and he's bang in the middle of this whole art scene. It was absolutely inevitable that he'd become an artist, but he's mad about music as well. Stravinsky comes up as well. I reckon they might have been mates, because he's obviously actually mates with all these big names he mentions, because they're in the same circle. They're going to all these masked balls and fancy dress parties, and they're having parties where they're playing charades and dressing up. There's a lot going on here that he's not saying.
It's amazing how often Stravinsky pops up in these memoirs, because I don't consider him to be contemporary, because he's a composer.
Nor do I. I think he's like Mozart, but he actually is a real person.
But he's been in like Quincy Jones's book, and there was somebody else, Zsa Gabor maybe.
Yes.
Like, he's part of society in the first half of the 20th century.
Yes, it's true.
It's weird.
I know, it is weird. It's because he's so famous. He can't be real. But he is. He's just a bloke.
Dior is having a fantastic time in 1920s Paris. But even though we're between the wars, military service is still compulsory in France. And he kind of avoids it and postpones it. But eventually, you know, he has no choice. He has to go and do his bit for the country. And when he's 22, he does have to go off and do his duty.
He somehow wangles it. He tells him he's a pacifist.
Yeah, and I think this is his privilege and his money helping him. He gets a cushy job doing it.
Yeah, he does.
And he basically says all he did was figure out what he wanted to do in life. And then when he came out, that's when he opened an art gallery with his friend.
Yeah.
And so he has this friend who has the most French name I've ever heard, Jacques Bonjon.
It's brilliant.
And they're really they're focusing on Picasso, Matisse, Braque, Dufy, but they're friends with these people as well.
Yes.
And then through having the gallery, they end up being part of the circle with like Salvador Dali, Max Jacob, Giacometti. I mean, gosh, it's all going on.
Yes.
It's amazing, actually.
It is,
to think all of those people are contemporary.
I know.
All around at the same time in Paris.
And he actually says that he used to entice males to parties at his house. This is his parents' house, which sounds massive, because they would just retire to a wing in the house and these people would party on. And he said it's frivolous times, mad evenings, and they'd dress up and have improvs to music. And I'm thinking, this sounds like a very gay lifestyle. This sounds like Oscar Wilde parties to me.
Yeah.
Mind you, it could be from times when women didn't mix at all, but it's certainly all the parties are man parties and they're dressing up. And it does. He never says anything personal.
Yeah.
But you just get that impression.
I mean, when did this book come out?
Oh, it came out the year he died, which is 1957. He must have published it and died, or died and published it.
He wouldn't have referenced being gay.
Oh no, he couldn't have said anything. No. But you just get this idea of it, like the Oscar Wilde parties, or that sort of underworld.
So they opened this art gallery, and I love this, is that his mum and dad actually just ignored his pleas to open this art gallery. But in the end, he was given hundreds and thousands of francs to open it. This is how much money his mum and dad have got.
Yeah.
They give him hundreds of thousands of francs to open the art gallery on the express condition that he wasn't allowed to put his name on the art gallery, because his parents said to have one's name over a shop was considered by my parents to be the nadir of social shame. Wow.
Yeah. It's like having a grocery shop or something, isn't it? Because then you're just a shopkeeper.
Yeah. So even though it's an art gallery, his parents would have been ashamed if his name was on it. This is how posh these people are.
Yeah, I know. Yes. Of course, an art gallery is a shop. It's important that we remember this. When there's so much snobbery with art, it's just a shop. It's essentially a shop. People need to get over themselves. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, so he's definitely massively funded and very, very privileged.
Yeah.
And I don't blame him for putting all this at the end of the book, because it means we don't judge him the rest of the time we read his whole life story.
Mm-hmm.
Because he was very much helped up. Well, that's fair enough.
Yeah, I mean, that's not his fault, is it?
No, and he had a great time running this art gallery, and him with a friend. But what stopped everybody, and it was before even the war, was the Great Depression, which, you know, the big crash in the US in 1929.
Yeah.
It affected Paris a year later and the rest of the world, and it absolutely crucified everyone. Like, his dad's capital was all in real estate, and that all collapsed, and he was totally ruined, his dad. His mum died of... Oh my God, his brother died of a disease that came on really quick, and his mum then died of grief just before his dad was ruined, so it all went to pot. Sounds like everything went to pot. And he just got a few grand together and went to Russia on a architectural study trip and had a very interesting time. Meanwhile, the gallery fell into ruin.
This was the first part of the book where I kind of thought, oh, come on, Dior. Your family who have supported you your whole entire life and let you had this amazing life hanging out in the Belle Époque and Paris.
Yes.
And then this devastating thing happens to, like, your dad and your family. He does have other brothers and sisters. They're all plunged into relative poverty and despair. And his reaction to that is to go on a field trip to Russia.
Yeah.
He doesn't hang around and help his family.
No.
And try and help them get back on their feet or anything. I mean, eventually they all do all right out of him, I'm sure. So I kind of thought to myself, come on, you're 25 at this point. You can pull your weight and you can flip and help your dad. And he just went off to Russia, and it really annoyed me when I read that. But anyway, he did have an interesting time there.
Yeah, very interesting time. But then, whilst he's gone, the gallery collapsed and his partner reported to him that they're in ruin. So he wasn't even there for his own business partner.
Right, yeah.
So it's quite annoying.
I wonder if it was because, you know, like Trump, you know, like when your parents are extremely rich and you live in a big house and you have Fraulines looking after you, whether there is that distance between yourself and your parents and you don't have that much of a familial bond, so you don't feel so much duty towards them and you are more self-centered and you are just go out and do your own thing.
Maybe.
I think that's what's happening here.
Oh, yeah, I never thought about that, because he's probably just brought up by staff. Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, I learned so much from reading these books.
Yeah, you're right, because he just doesn't say anything personal, one word personal about how he feels about any of his family other than his sister. We'll come to that in a bit.
No, but he doesn't tell the whole story of his sister. I read about her afterwards, but we'll get there.
Really? Oh, my God.
Yeah, I would say he's borderline sociopathic, actually.
Oh, really?
Yeah, let me just put that out there. Kristen Dior is a sociopath.
You'll have to explain that in a bit.
Well, I already have. He just seems to have no empathy for his family going through terrible times.
But that's his family. But you might have just explained that with the, being brought up by maids in the linen room. But because when he's at length talking about his house of Dior, he really loves every person that works for him. He describes the characters.
Yeah.
It's completely different from his family. His real family are his friends and the people he works with. Because, he describes them in depth. You get to really know those women who work at Dior House and their characters and little foibles and, when they get upset and all sorts. And you get to know the models a bit. He cares about them.
Also, if he was gay and he couldn't express himself to his family.
Oh,
and then he did find a bunch of friends in Paris where he could be himself. He's going to connect with them.
Yes, that's your new family, isn't it?
It's that at home.
Yeah, it's totally that. Well, yes. Whereas his parents had said you're not allowed to join the Bohemians, so they didn't want him to be that person. But that's the person he is.
They didn't want him bumming around Paris, did they?
No, they didn't. Okay, we've got to the bottom of it. Oh,
the bottom of it. Okay, so he went to Russia. He comes back.
He comes back, right? He comes back. It's 1931. He's broke. He's got nowhere to live. His dad's moved back into the countryside. And he just sleeps on friends' different couches or spare rooms.
Couch surfing.
And he's got no money. But he parties on. I don't know how he's got no money, but he's going to charade parties, fancy dress parties. Actually, people are feeding them for free in restaurants. I don't know how, but he's just well connected.
I kind of wonder if this is a thing of the scene, because in these scenes, which are populated by artists, you also get the patrons.
Yes.
And I think because Dior came from money, but you're not telling me that all of those artists immersed in that scene have money. Lots of them will be penniless artists,
Yes.
and I think they get fed by the scene. Like the patrons are there with the money and the artists are there with
it creates a great atmosphere.
Yeah, and I think Dior is, at this moment in time, changing from like the status of a patron into becoming like a penniless artist.
Yes, that's
and
right.
So they're supporting him.
And you want to be a penniless artist because you're a bohemian, and that goes with it. You're rejecting your roots, aren't you?
Yeah.
You're joining the gang.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, but of course all this partying and not eating properly made him ill. So then he goes to the Balearic Islands and other places for a year to get well. And this is when he discovers the art that's in him. Actually, he actually does something.
Hang on.
What?
His year in the Balearic Islands was funded by his friends.
Friends? They all grouped together and paid for it.
So they weren't just buying his supper. They actually paid for him to have a year.
That's true. Firstly, they're rich because he's staying in hotels and whatever.
Wow.
Yeah. Nice. You've got the right friend.
Yeah, got the right friend.
Yeah. Yeah. So, he really did discover the art in him. And when he came back, he was going around for office jobs. And he'd gone to Lucien Lelong fashion house. And suddenly, out of nowhere, he said, I think I'd be more use in the actual couture side of the business, even though he'd gone for an office job. And he surprised himself saying it. And he ended up living with this friend, Jean Ozen, who became a really big designer in theatre, he says, after 1945, who actually really encouraged him to draw and sort of taught him and guided him into drawing fashion designs and then showed people them. And so he actually started to build up a bit of confidence as a designer.
Yeah.
Which is really cool.
And he started submitting his sketches to magazines as well at the same time.
Yeah.
And he started getting paid for his drawings.
Yeah.
And it was the first time he ever got paid for doing anything creative. He must be about 30 at this point.
Yeah, he must.
How old is he?
This is 1937. So
wow,
he's
so he's 32.
Yeah.
I do like a late starter.
Yeah, it's encouraging, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. Hang on, he got a full-time job designing for Piguet. Is that how you say that?
Piguet, yeah, I didn't know. Let's call him Piggy. No.
Yeah.
Piguet. Piguet?
Piguet.
Yeah.
So he was actually designing dresses, and some of his sold and were quite successful. So that was good. So then, bloody hell, then there's another war. And this time he has to spend a year with peasants. Yes. Those are his actual words.
But he does say that he kind of went and he had to do hard labour. He's not fighting in the war.
No.
But he does, I guess, as part of his service to his country. He goes off and he tends the land and does the crops. I mean, he calls it hard labour. I'd actually like to know exactly what he was doing.
I would too. Because he actually says he completely fell in love with the countryside.
Yeah.
The seasons changing. That sounds to me like he's just meandering about.
Yeah.
But also, with a shovel over his shoulder.
This does tell me that wherever he is, whatever the circumstances, his brain is just attuned to find the beautiful thing.
Yeah, that's right.
The visual aesthetic. He's looking at nature. He's looking at the surroundings. All of a sudden, he's away from the glamour of Paris and he's with the peasants in the countryside, but he can still see the beauty of it.
Yes, it's true.
Yeah,
and I actually do think he did do proper work, because when he got back to Paris, he got the land around the house and actually cultivated it with his sister, because it was still the middle of the war. It was 1940.
Yeah.
And they grew a lot of vegetables and stuff, so he obviously had been doing something.
And then by pure luck, he actually had sold. So when they were living in relative poverty during the war, growing their own vegetables and selling surplus at the market, he actually sold some paintings to America before the war, and the money never came through. And then just by chance, about a year later, he got 1,000 francs for the paintings that he'd sold. So that did lift him and his sister out of poverty during the war.
Yes.
But then he did kind of go back to Paris quite soon. It's not like he was out for the whole of the war.
No, he really wasn't. He was back in the heart of Paris, which were occupied by the Germans, we must not forget, which is nuts. And he went back into the throng of that, to work in the fashion house. Just insane.
It's amazing to think that the fashion house was still
Yeah, even he
going
says
on
that.
during the war.
Yeah, he said because it was such a non-essential thing, they were constantly amazed they were still allowed to carry on, but they were right to the end. And so, yeah, around this time, his sister got deported and he never traced her. What do you know about this then? Because that's all he said.
She was in a concentration camp.
Right.
That's why he couldn't find her.
So did he ever manage to trace her?
No.
But... Said he exhausted himself trying to trace her.
Yeah, because what happened is, the perfume, Miss Dior?
Yes.
That's for her, Catherine,
yeah,
his sister
named after
Catherine.
her. I read that.
He did it in her honour because she ended up in a concentration camp for years.
Did she survive, do you know?
I think she was there till the end of the war and then she got released.
Bloody hell.
So he went back to Paris, and it sounds like he had a lucky escape, actually. So going back to the occupied city of Paris, presumably his sister stayed in the country with her vegetable patch, and it sounds like she was captured and put in the concentration camp.
Yeah, they used to do it. It's like in The Sound of Music. They used to take the big houses, the fancy people's houses, to live in, didn't they, for the offices and stuff.
Oh, yeah.
So that might have happened.
Yeah.
Well, he said that work was the only drug which enabled him to forget his sister.
Yeah.
That's how bad it really was. Terrible. Anyway, so he's in Paris.
And he goes to, Robert Piguet invites him back, but he does stall a bit, Dior, but he eventually goes back, and actually Piguet has installed a young designer, Antonio de Castillo, in his place, in the job that Dior was expecting to go back and get. The thing that surprises me is how big some of these couture houses are.
Yeah, I know.
It's like there's 8 floors in a building and there's 100 people designing and making dresses.
Yes.
So there's room for him.
There is room for him. But then this other designer, Lucien Lelong, just took him in straight away. He said, I'll have you. Mm-hmm. So he spent 10 happy, delightful years, apparently, working for this bloke, designing stuff for him. And
he doesn't seem
to
have...
no further ambition.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to have any aspirations of being a sole name designer. He's very, very happy working in the Lelong couture house.
He's really happy. And what he's actually doing in that time is really learning the whole business of couture.
Yeah.
The whole business from the ground up. He doesn't see everything, but he learns enough. And he's got a real bee in his bonnet about the hideousness of fashions that had happened through the war.
Yeah.
Because all the glamour had gone, really. I mean, he says, post-war Paris was devastated. The countryside, the cities, rationing, black market, but he just skirts over that. Good pun. Because it's actually the fashion that he's just mostly upset about more than any other destruction. He's like, the hats are too big, the skirts are too short, the jackets are too long, the shoes are too heavy. He hates it. It's gone all military, hasn't it, and practical. And he wants to bring back glamour.
There's a couple of things that I realised through reading this book is how fashion, even though that fashion house was allowed to continue throughout the war, the fashions changed because Dior changes it at the end of the war. And then I think the fashions change because any artist reflects what's going on in the world, but also they can only work with the materials that are available to them at that time.
Yeah.
And I think things become militaristic and less fussy because there was probably less fabric available.
That's exactly why. No, that is why.
Right,
yeah.
Okay. So I'm learning about fashion through the years.
It was rationing, yeah. So their skirts are just tight, short, all of that. That's absolutely the case. Because especially when you realise what he's brought back was this huge skirt, and he actually describes how much fabric had to be draped to make this huge skirt, and that was just... because you can, and that's why it was high end as well, because it would have cost a lot of money to get hold of that amount of fabric. Because it wasn't in abundance in 1946 when he started the House of Dior. So it was luxury to have a huge amount of fabric skirt. Well, I go fabric shopping now to make costumes, and it's still very expensive if you want to do a very big skirt, because you'll have to buy tons of fabric to make a massive skirt, and it's expensive. It's actually expensive.
Right.
It's going luxury. It's gone down the luxury line.
Coming out of the war, obviously, I guess women had more practical clothing. There was a need for it because the men went to war and the women went to work. The country. They went to work. They were in the factories and stuff. So clothing became more practical.
Yes.
And then when Dior, at the end of the war, he's kind of saying stuff like, I want to accentuate the breasts again. I want to make it more feminine.
Yeah, breasts and hips.
Yeah, and it's kind of a bit like...
Because women had become men. What? Because women were working. So they sort of...
I know, but I also...
Mind you, the trousers.
I don't think this is a good thing from a gender perspective. I think this is a man putting women back into an objectifying silhouette.
Yes.
Whereas
you're
before,
quite right.
women
That's
were actually
absolutely
doing
true.
very well during the war, keeping the country going. And then the men came back. The men came back and took those jobs off the women again. And the women had to go back, I don't know, running the homes and stuff. Obviously not all of them, but a lot of them. And now Dior's coming back and putting them all back, accentuating their breasts and their hips.
I know what you're saying. It's a good point. But then you don't have to wear Dior. You know what I mean?
Well,
he totally changed fashion though. But the thing is, everything rebels against the thing before, doesn't it? And actually, I'd say we've got to the point now in modern times where you could be anyone. You could be in a military outfit, a beautiful dress. You can literally pick your era and wear it. Whereas I guess in those days, like his first collection went out in 1946 or 7 or something and just changed fashion overnight all around the world. Which is crazy to think.
It's
now.
amazing how that hit big.
Yeah.
So hang on. So to get there, he's still working for Lalonde, but he goes out and wanders around the city a lot because he loves architecture, right? He just is forever out.
Yes.
He just loves pounding the streets. And then one day he bumps into a friend or an acquaintance, right, who says to him...
Yeah, so when this bloke comes along one day and says... I need to start a new, basically he ends up starting his own house funded by a very rich man. It's funny because that bloke says, do you know anyone who would start up a new house? He's like, no, I can't think of anyone. And he asked him 3 times. And finally he says, would I do?
Yeah.
That's what leads you to think he's just a very humble man. But he really didn't have the ambition. And, okay, if you think he started in 1947, his first collection, he died 10 years later, exactly 10 years, of a heart attack. I actually don't think he had it in him. He talks about all the stress, like absolute agonies over each dress and each collection. And I actually think it killed him.
Yeah, no, you're right, because
he wasn't cut out for it.
One of the things he says in this book, and obviously he's writing this autobiography towards the end of his life, while he is Christian Dior, when he writes about working for Lucien Lalonde, for 10 years, he actually says, I managed to work in fashion with none of the pressure of executing my own designs.
Yeah, he's just happy.
So, yeah, he actually didn't want it, did he? It sounds like.
Exactly. Didn't want it. No, and he said when he was really on a high after his first collection was a success, like literally that night, someone said to him, it's all very well, but from now on, you're going to have the pressure of having to live up to everyone's expectation of this first collection. It will never be fun again. I don't think it ever was. He had little highs, terrible lows, stress.
So we're kind of like jumping ahead significantly, but let's just, because we're running out of time. But so he gets his own house, he gets his own fashion studio.
Yeah.
And his very first show to the industry is a massive success.
Huge.
In a way, I mean, he has put the work in. This didn't come out of nowhere. He's worked at this other couture house for 10 years and before that, and he's very well known in society. So he had all the right connections. He had a wealth of experience. So in a way, it kind of is like somebody, I don't know, like a singer leaving a successful band and having their first solo album and it being massive.
Yeah, it's true. It's exactly that.
I think that's kind of what this is. He's not coming from nowhere. But still, it's a massive success that he now has to live up to for the rest of his life.
And it was just that his feelings about bringing back beauty, making women look beautiful again, that's what he was thinking of. And it just happened to really coincide.
He hit the zeitgeist, I imagine,
with exactly what people wanted. They wanted to go out feeling beautiful after all the horror of war.
They wanted to see tits again, didn't they?
Yeah, they wanted just to feel feminine and feel lovely. And, that's okay. You can still work and do that. But anyway, this book it goes into the history of fashion and how it evolved into the world where you've got these haute couture houses where the personality of the head of the house, like completely one person changes fashion, is so important because it didn't used to be like that. It's really interesting going through the history of it all.
Yeah. And he really does have his army of, women, basically,
yes,
isn't it?
And he really describes
work with him.
how he puts the house together. It's like chapter by chapter how it technically works, what the names are of each level and what they do, what jobs they do. And I tell you what, it's really confusing, isn't it? Because the models are called mannequins.
Oh, yeah, I was so confused. And
the dresses are called models.
Yes. Yeah, it's confusing.
So they can all be in a room looking at a model and then a mannequin walks in. You're like, what?
Yeah.
So confusing.
Because he was talking about the models being pirated. What do you call it? Counterfeit. And I was thinking, how are they doing that? Are they cloning human beings?
Yeah.
No, you mean the dress.
Yeah. So there's so much to it. Oh my God. So he describes this whole process. And it's interesting to me because he'll do like 100 sketches of ideas and he'll just have this inspiration. And they're really loose. And he actually describes that he's trying to he actually wants the movement and the energy of it. So it's not really detailed. Then when he meets his technical supervisor or whatever they're called, technical director, he will verbally translate what he means, the more technical side of this loose sketch, to the technical director. And it's them who have got into the mind of Dior who will then go and talk to the makers. And so they're responsible for going from his brain to the actual making of the toile, which is like, not tissue paper, but it's like the mock-up. It's a mock-up in cheaper fabric.
Yeah.
And then
I thought about you a lot when I was reading this book, because you do design clothes. So do you find, like, reading about his process, was it similar to yours? Is it kind of like your process?
Yeah, it is really interesting, actually, because I don't know anything about fashion because I didn't come from fashion at all. I've just gone straight into theatre. And there's a costume supervisor I would always work with, and they do exactly that job. I go through all the drawings and then they go to the makers, not me. And they're the in-between person, so it's the same.
Then they come back to you and they kind of say, this can't work, then you have to go back and adapt your design.
No, because you've usually worked it out in the chat. The technical director person or costume supervisor really knows what they're doing. They're always really good as well.
Okay.
But the thing is, sometimes people say to me, they like my drawings because I show exactly what I want. Everything's drawn. But there's other designers who do it all sketchy and wavy and it's really vague. And they have to be interpreted. And now I'm reading this, I'm like, oh, right, that's completely valid. And they maybe they came from fashion.
Right.
Because that's how it works in fashion. Whereas I always draw every detail.
Yours are like technical drawings.
Yeah. But I didn't even know, I don't know anything else. You know, you don't, do you?
No, but it's
I got
interesting.
trained and then I went out in the world on my own. I never
because it's interesting. I had the same thought, because obviously I've known you a long time and I know your process because I've seen it. I've been with you when you've been working many times. And the thing is, I also thought in my head when I read this, Dior is just putting some straight lines on a piece of paper. And how is that? There's only so many ways you can draw a plain skirt, surely.
Yeah, really sketchy ideas.
Whereas when I see you, yours are just so fully realised and accomplished. It's like there's no mistaking what you mean with your design. But with
my drawings are exactly on stage the same as the drawings, nearly always exactly the same.
But it's like with the little black dress, right? You kind of think there's only so many ways you can do that. And if they're sketching that and it is just some lines on a page, I mean, it's almost like your creations come from you, right? And they're very definite. Whereas I'm thinking in the house of Dior, so he's just doing almost like a preliminary sketch. And then that's going through a chain of people who eventually evolve it and change it. So it's like a team of people.
Yeah, but he's part of it. Because he'll look at the toile and he'll change that and move the length of this and change that. And then they'll make it. And then he goes, because he describes all this, goes to the fitting. They have like 3 different fittings. And he's agonising and he's choosing the hats and the accessories and the buttons and this and that. And he very rarely actually drapes the fabric. But then he's chosen the fabric as well. They've got hundreds of rolls of fabric all laid out. Some works with this pattern, some doesn't. Because it's completely different. Because he's creating something that's going to get mass-produced. Well, originally it wasn't mass-produced, but it was reproduced a lot. You know, nowadays they're mass-produced. But
something else I learnt from this book is how Christian Dior will go to a shop after his designs have been taken on by fashion stores and stuff. He'll go and see what they look like, because he says every time it's reproduced, it will lose a little bit of his initial design. And he says that when he designs in the future, he has to take that into account.
Yes.
That the dress is going to be available widely.
Yes.
His design will be somehow streamlined and changed. So it's interesting that even when things are, and that must happen now, Vivienne Westwood designs, or she would design a dress made in her studio, and then when it goes out to the shop, and then when it's reproduced to go out to the public, it's not quite the same as what she had in her mind.
Might be simplified a bit or something. Yeah, exactly. But then there's a difference, which I really got through this book, was haute couture, where people are actually going to the salon. They did these fashion shows every day. So if you were even a tourist, you could go and watch a fashion show, because you couldn't Google it. You'd have to actually sit there and watch 60 models, 60 dresses walk by, over the course of an hour or something, and then choose the one you want, and then have fittings. Then they would have been fitted to you. And it was only near the end of the book, like in the late mid-50s, when they actually opened the shop, which was ready to wear, which is pret-a-porter. So you don't get fittings. It's ready to wear.
Ready to wear, yeah.
And you just buy it off the shelf. And I was like, oh my God, that's what that all means. That's because once you'd have never just bought a dress off the shelf. You'd have always had it fitted to you.
Wow.
By a dressmaker every single time you went and bought a dress. That's mad, isn't it?
It is mad. And it actually makes me wonder if there are designers even now who have their little salons, is it ateliers and stuff, and they stay an exclusive dressmaker to the rich and famous, and actually they have no designs to branch out and have their work taken over by the masses and put in high street stores. Or do you think those designers exist?
They just work. I know Prince had his own designer who lived in Paisley Park and just designed his stage clothes and clothes, because he never had an off day.
Right, yeah.
And the Queen always had her own designer, all those amazing colourful suits. So those people. Yeah, it's another whole world, isn't it?
So there are designers, I suppose, who don't want to become the household name. They're in it for the art of it, and they get well paid doing a few good outfits for a few rich people.
Exactly.
Yeah, interesting.
Exactly. That's more like being a costume designer, really, because nothing's ever going to get mass produced. There's one of everything you ever make.
And do you know what? Becoming a mass household name, I do think, like, just to use Vivienne Westwood, because she's the only other fashion designer I know, and we've read her book, I almost think becoming an international brand like that is kind of against some of her ethos and things that she started out with.
Yes.
I don't know how she reconciles it, really.
Yeah, but, I know how she reconciled it, because she started using it as a platform to talk about climate change. That's how she did it.
Yeah.
That's how she coped. Yeah. Whereas I think Dior's was very ambitious, because he got perfume out almost the first year he started.
Yes.
And then he started branching out to shoes, and then he travelled America, and then he got a couple of shops in New York. Oh my God, he got them all over the world in the end, in his lifetime, within that 2 years. He had shops in, one in Cuba or something?
Caracas.
And definitely London.
Yeah.
Chile, Mexico, Canada, Australia.
It happened very quickly, and I know it's not in this
book. In 1948, that happened.
Yeah.
A year later. It's incredible.
Within 10 years, so between starting and his death, he had stores all over the 5 continents.
Yeah.
So that was an explosion.
Oh, amazing, yeah.
I mean, even in this day and age, things don't really move that quickly.
No,
do they?
And overnight they called it the new look. It's incredible. And, he had to guard against people robbing his designs. And how they rob it was by watching the fashion shows and sketching the designs. And he said some people couldn't possibly have done it. They must have been people who could memorise, and they were allowed to write, so they must have written stuff and then memorised it. It's incredible. It's a different time. Same problems, different ways of people robbing them. Oh, and then people copied the patterns and tore the dresses apart when they were in the changing rooms to work out how they were made and stuff, so they could make cheap knockoffs.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
As well, the explosion as well, it's not just his talent and his designs, but it was also like a matter of timing. This all happened after World War II.
Yes.
Everything was entering a new era, and
he
he
was
just
leading it.
managed
Yeah.
to encapsulate everything, and he just hit the zeitgeist, and that exploded very, very quickly. He led the way, didn't he?
Exactly what he did. Yeah, he totally
What's
did.
interesting is that you find out through reading this book that he didn't really want to.
He didn't want to.
I think he'd have been happy being a little exclusive designer, actually.
All he ever wanted to do is make beautifully crafted dresses for an elite bunch of people.
But the thing is, if you're taking money, because this whole, when he did branch out on his own, it's because he took a lot of money from a businessman. And of course, that businessman's going to want a return. So in a way, you do kind of sell your soul to the devil.
That's true.
You're getting the money so you can do what you want and you can live a creative life. But that man is going to want a return on his money. So he pushes the business side.
Yes.
And then all of a sudden you're being pulled every which way. And
you're owned.
You know, you're getting the demands and the pressure that you die 10 years later of a heart attack.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, it's interesting actually, because 2 years before he died, 1955, a 19-year-old Yves Saint Laurent started working for him.
Yeah.
I don't think this is in the book. I think I got this from Google. But he very quickly shone. And Dior said, I know this is the man I need to take over from me when I die. And he got Yves Saint Laurent's mother in and told him this. But he literally didn't think he was going to die that soon. Or not even die, like retire. He just said, one day I want your son to take over my business. And then he bloody died. So a 21-year-old Yves Saint Laurent took over. Wow. And what I did read was that he was imposing his own style a bit too much and knocking away the core of Dior's style. So when he got recruited for the army, they sort of used that as an excuse to get rid of him. And he tried to sue. But ever since then, they've had designers who've really kept to the sort of brand. But, you know, there isn't just one style of dress. There's millions and billions. Mm-hmm. Is it Natalie Portman? She's the face of the perfume. And she, maybe this year, or maybe it was even this year, or last year, she wore a vintage Dior dress to I think it was the Met Gala, because it was a vintage year. And it's absolutely stunning. It's like silver, but almost peacocky, beautiful shapes, you know. And there's so much more to it than you think. You sort of got the idea of a Dior dress in your mind. There's billions and billions of variations of it.
And also, you know, it's like anticipating, predicting, what's the right word? Like you're designing next season.
Yes.
Before the fashion happens. So in a way...
Yeah, well, you're creating the fashion.
Yeah, you're dictating.
Yes.
The way fashion is moving. And I suppose at the beginning, when you're up and coming, you have to try and figure out what is going to be the next big thing. But I think when you become Christian Dior, you say what the next big thing is going to be.
That's right. No, that's absolutely right. And then he said he had to adapt his designs to different countries. For example, when he went to America and he was in New York a lot, he realised they had cocktail parties, which were completely different from the parties in France or Europe. So he had to design a different type of dress for a cocktail party. I don't know, I imagine it's different climates, obviously, and different fabrics, and, you know, what different women in different parts of the world were like, or what their society's like, and what was permitted. You know, you had to take on board all these different things. It's a lot, I tell you. It's not surprising he had a heart attack.
Yes.
It's a lot of pressure, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Another thing about him is that he didn't look like a couturier. He just looked like a sort of plump, ordinary man in a boring suit and tie. And he says it all the time. He really tried to keep away and out of the limelight, because nobody would have imagined that this amazing Christian Dior name, they wouldn't match it to the face. You know, it was so boring.
Oh.
What?
You just made me remember something. You know, I said earlier about him putting women back into things which show off their breasts and hips after the war. When he went to America, the suffragettes were waiting for him at the airport.
Oh, yeah.
There was a protest saying to him, how dare you do this to women? How dare you objectify us? And he said he never felt more thankful that he just looked like any other businessman, because he walked through undetected.
Yes, because he just doesn't look like a dandy,
wow.
Which is what you'd expect a famous couturier to look like. Yeah, it's true.
Interesting then, actually. I've just remembered, even though I said that earlier, that his dresses were controversial to people at that time.
That's true. But also the Americans at the same time were saying, why have you covered up our American women's legs? Because his dresses went right to the floor, and they had been getting right up to the knees. So, you know, because they boofed out, so he was showing off the hips, but You know,
I mean, I guess that's like now there are
can't win them all.
plenty of women who like to be objectified. You have Playboy now, and you also have the campaigns to shut that down by other women. So I imagine we always had those opposing sides even 100 years ago.
Yes, some may feel objectified, others feel beautiful.
Yeah.
In the same dress.
The same dress provokes very different reactions.
Yeah.
No, it's interesting actually, because I never really, I mean, you're very attuned to fashion because you're a designer, and I recognize it as art, but I never think of it as having that kind of social impact as other art does. But it absolutely does. It reflects the times.
Yeah,
it
does.
allows people to express their personality, and it actually, fashion can be very political.
Yeah.
No, and I just find it interesting as well, just talking about the gender divide of fashion, how men and women's fashion is different. And you kind of think it's essentially the same piece of material that's just cut and stitched in a different way. And it's interesting to think that some of it is acceptable for a man to wear and some of it is acceptable for a woman to wear. And you kind of think it's just material.
I know, it's weird, isn't it? And there have been eras where men were just as dandy as the women. You know, their jackets would flounce out in pleats and they'd have wigs and white faces and lipstick, and you know, there's been all sorts. It always evolves.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, it's fascinating. And look at all the bands we talk about. The ones we love always go with fashion.
Visual.
Yeah, and the fashion makes the music, or the music makes the fashion.
True,
yeah,
actually.
so this is just another side to it.
It's such an important art form.
It's very important, and we all actually take part in it every single day with choosing what we put on every day. The wonderful world of fashion.
Thank you so much for listening to this episode of Thrift Shop Biography. We love making this podcast, and we're absolutely thrilled that so many of you are already listening. You could really help us out by leaving us a review somewhere, wherever you listen to this podcast. And if you could share us, tell your friends about us, or drop some links on social media. We have a Facebook page called Thrift Shop Biography, so make sure you come over there to hear about the episodes first and what else we're up to. Okay, see you next week. And if you're new here, there are loads more episodes now to go and listen in the back catalogue, so make sure you go and enjoy them. Okay, thank you very much.